absolute honour and privilege to be asked to share at this event, and I've tuned in to a lot of the workshops that have gone on, especially the ones where our founders were involved. And I went to see Ken and Mary when they came to London, and they did a workshop, and I just get so much warmth in my heart when I listen to them share, and I just am so grateful for this program and for everything it's given me, and for the transformative, the phenomenal change that has happened in my life due to this program. And it's you know, it has been like the missing piece of the jigsaw that was so needed in my life, you know. And my story is very you know, I came from 2 alcoholic parents, and I was brought up with those sort of rules, those unhealthy rules of, you know, don't speak, don't feel, don't talk. And I really, really understand today how damaging that was for me, you know, and this process of uncovering, discovering and recovering, you know, the past of what happened to me. And it's very funny because I never really thought the past was that relevant. And now I have such an amazing view of how damaged I was actually by my childhood. And at the time I just thought it was normal, but I remember going to other people's houses and looking at them sit round their table, have a meal, and this feeling of emotion and connection and warmth. And when I'd come back to my house, I knew we didn't have that feeling. So I knew I couldn't articulate it, and I couldn't actually say what it was, but I knew that my house was different. And like, I used to watch the Waltons, and I used to think, I want that, you know, I want good night, Granddad, good night, Jimbo, you know, because it just didn't happen in my house. In my house, it was like rows and doors slamming, and my mum throwing things at my dad, and just, you know, as a little girl, I was very, very scared. I was very hyper vigilant. I was always trying to suss out what everyone was feeling, when it was going to kick off, you know, and one asset that's given me is that I'm a really, really good emotional reader. I can tell when people, I just have this sixth sense, because I had to do that as a child. It was a survival mechanism for me in my family of origin, that I had to know when things were going to turn bad and how quick they would turn. And you know, and I had a little sister, and I remember that you know, I didn't feel love from my mum. You know, my mum has always been very, very wrapped up in herself. So she has, with her alcoholism, there's a lot of narcissism. So it's always been about her. And I know that there wasn't really room for me. There's still not room for me, you know, in my relationships with my mum and my dad. They're still very, very self-absorbed. And I know growing up, the biggest thing that I couldn't do was I wasn't taught how to express my emotions on any level, you know, and I was taught to cover up my real self. You know, it was like that authentic me. And I know I wasn't given the experience to really to turn into who I was supposed to be. My mum was very, very controlling, very dominant, very angry, and I had to be what she wanted to be. And parenting was very critical. She's a perfectionist. She has all the isms as well. So I was constantly trying to make her happy. And my sister was born disabled, so I spent a lot of my time looking after my sister. So I was already in a caretaker role as a little girl. And then when my parents would get drunk, I'd be the protector, you know. So there was a lot going on, and I really understand that, you know, my codependency was born from from being a child in a system that was really unhealthy. And my parents had also come from alcoholic family systems. So there was this generational, this passed down of how you know, I was parented how my parents were parented. And you know, and I now understand through the work in this program of how wrong that was and how damaging that was, and the lasting effect that that had on me growing up, how I went into relationships, how I developed, and the knock-on effect to all the facets of the codependency. And all I knew from a young age was that I really did not like the way I looked. I didn't like hearing the sound of my own voice. And I remember as I hit teenage years, just having this immense self-loathing, you know, levels of where I'd see photos of myself and I would just rip them off. I could not even look at myself. I just found myself physically revolting. And you know, and I really understand today that that's not normal, you know, and I think as hitting that teenager bit with the hormones, you know, I felt the dis-ease of the codependency of this, you know, not feeling comfortable in my body and not feeling part of. That was the other thing. I knew that there was nothing in my home. There wasn't a connection. There wasn't a feeling of love. There wasn't that feeling of warmth. So it wasn't like I wanted to stay there. And I started leaving, you know, going out. As soon as my mum gave me a bit of freedom, I started to leave the family home. And my mum had split up from my dad and remarried a stepfather who I also didn't like. So my relationship around men, my dad left, and then this other man moved in who I didn't like, and he didn't like me. And I lived in my bedroom. My truth is that I was brought up in a middle-class family upbringing where the children are seen and not heard, and I was literally put in a bedroom, and that's where I lived. I didn't eat with my family. We didn't go on family holidays. We didn't have any, you know, their drinking was their main focus, and I was just put in a bedroom. And I understand now that, you know, as a parent, that's not, you know, parents are there to love children and to give them guidance and to give them support and to teach them how to be a grown-up. And I know I didn't get any of that, you know. And I think for me, what happened was, I mean, I went into drugs and alcohol, and that was, in a way, that was like it says in our readings, it was a solution to my disease. It was a solution to my self-hatred. And I really, you know, I recreated. I see my family of origin, they sort of primed me for addiction, really. And then what I did in active addiction was just I recreated. I pulled in people that could neglect me and reaffirm that I'm not enough. And the core of me has always felt not enough. And the core as me has always been self-hatred. And I've always had incredibly, I wouldn't even say low self-esteem. I've had absolutely no self-esteem, you know, but what I do know is that when I get attention from other people, I feel like my self-esteem comes, you know, so my external stimuli would make me feel good, but I didn't have that little pilot light. You know, normal healthy people have that pilot light of self-esteem that's there all the time, saying they feel good about themselves. And I'm really aware that mine was just this little flame, and when people were nice to me, it would flare up and then they'd go, and then it would go back to this little flame. And you know, so I really understood growing up that I didn't know then how backward I was. And I guess I see codependency like being a grown-up, you know, a grown-up body with a really little person inside. And I know it is a disease of immaturity. And I've really had to face trying to grow up in recovery in CoDA, of trying to start to be an adult. And you know, I used drugs for a long time, and then I got clean at 31, and I went into 12-step recovery. And I literally, you know, I brought all of my energy into recovery and I chucked myself in. But the trouble was that a 12-step program, really all it did was fuel my codependency. And I just had 10 years in another program of recovery where all I did was look after others, avoid my internal world. I did so much service, you know, I sponsored so many women. I did, you know, constantly busy. I started working in the field of addiction, and what I did was just avoided. So what had happened to me was all still in my heart, but I didn't connect with it. So there was this pain that I was on the run from. And that's how I see really CoDA recovery. It's like this whole, you know, my story has been screaming at me in my heart space for, you know, nearly all of my life, saying you need to do this work. And you know, and I had 10 years in recovery, sort of acting out all my codependent behaviors and just avoiding myself and avoiding the inner journey by looking outwards and using other people. And I knew that there was something majorly wrong with me, because every time I went into a relationship, I would have this stuff that would come up that was just like this pain, you know, this pain. When relationships ended, I would hit this suicidal tendencies. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't manage the feelings. And I didn't hear people talking about this in the other recovery program I was in. And I was like, you know, what is this stuff? And it got worse. The more I was in this other, you know, I got 3 years clean and it was worse, and 5 years clean, it got worse. And I was like, oh my God, you know, there is something else here. And I knew that this level of self-loathing, I had 10 years in recovery in this other fellowship, and I still hated myself. And I was like, this isn't normal. I've done all these steps, all this service. And then someone had said to me, and the times that I'd been to CoDA a few times, and I'd only come at the end of a relationship and I'd have snot coming out my nose and I'd be like, I'm going to die, I can't cope. But I never stayed here to do the work. I never stayed here to put pen to paper. I never stayed here to go through those 12 steps and find out what codependency was. I just bring my pain in and then go back out and repeat the same patterns. And I pulled in people to just recreate the same drama. You know, I'd pull in unavailable emotional people that were unavailable to me and that just could not love me. And I would do all of the stuff that is still this sabotaging behaviors, where I'd push people away and I'd be critical and just not let the love in. I could not let the love in. And it was, you know, and I really understood that there was something that needed to be addressing. And I'm so glad that I followed my pain to get here, to find CoDA, and at 10 years clean, to commit to doing the work here. And I've been in CoDA 10 years now, and you know, I've done so much work in this fellowship because I have such a desire to not live out my damage. You know, I really do not want to carry this legacy that's been through generations of being, like it says in our readings, of being in empty, meaningless relationships with not feeling the love. And, you know, we talk about the layers of the onion, and I feel like I came in with a armor-plated onion. It was like this warrior onion that had this outer casing that took years to melt, you know, and I did a bit of work in another fellowship, but I got here and that was where it started to melt, this outer layer of my onion, the softness and the gentleness, you know, and I started to be more gentle on me and understand that my defects are not a bad thing about me. There is a result of trauma as being a little girl, of not being given what I needed, and my you know, maladapted coping strategies is my codependency. And you know, and I was a chronic caretaker. You know, I am a giver in my life. I've always been a giver, you know, and I give because you know, I have this desperate need to be needed. And I really understood how I could start to pull that apart in CoDA and find out where it came from and how it was detrimental to me. And when I came to CoDA, my truth is, I felt like I was about to have a breakdown because I was so busy in my life. My codependency manifested as just being busy, you know, busy, avoiding inner world, you know, looking after others, not focusing on me. I'm really not paying any attention to my self-care or my self-love. And I didn't know how to have a loving relationship with myself. And it says that in our readings as well, about starting to adopt a loving relationship with ourselves. And that has, you know, been a phenomenally long process and a phenomenally slow process, but it's been so rewarding. And, you know, I had this thing where I didn't set boundaries. I didn't know how to say no. I couldn't say no to anything. You know, it was like if someone, whether I was in a team meeting, wherever I was in my life, if someone said, can someone do something? I would immediately go, yes, you know. And because of that, my life was just totally overwhelmed with busyness and overextending. I didn't know how to take care of myself in relationships. So I had this real problem of just feeling like everybody wants a bit of me. You know, there wasn't any time for me. I couldn't be on my own. I remember I got this beautiful flat in recovery, and I'd never spent any time in it on my own because I couldn't be on my own. I couldn't even manage my own company. And I always had this self-fulfilling prophecy in relationships where I just thought everyone is going to leave me. Everyone is going to leave me. And what I would do would just exhibit so many pushing away behaviors. You know, intimacy was so foreign to me that I couldn't let anyone in, and all my relationships would fail because I would do all of this testing. Do you really love me? By being badly behaved and being critical. And, you know, so I knew I had lots of difficulties, and I knew that this program would help me. And I believed in the promises. When I came here and I read the promises, you know, I knew I wanted all of that. I wanted to have loving relationships in my life. I wanted to have equal relationships. And I hadn't. All my relationships had really been me looking after other people, you know. And when I got here and started to do the step work, I started to see it was like putting on a pair of CoDA glasses. And the funny thing is that what it was, 3 friends of mine, we all came from this other fellowship, and we came into CoDA. We had no idea what we were doing. We were all really codependent, and we were like, let's form a step group together. And we were 3 like best friends, and it was the worst the worst thing. I would never suggest anybody to do a step group with your 3 best friends, because what we did, we decided to do a step a month, and over that year where we did our first load of steps, we just acted out all of our, well, we were recovering, you know, we were trying to get better from this codependency, but it wasn't healthy. And it wasn't, we had one that was the needy child, and then there was myself and my other friend that were the 2 caretakers. And we started to get well and stop caretaking and let her go. And she kept having tantrums because we were letting her go. And, you know, and what was great though was that CoDA started, we all started this process of finding our voice, you know. And my first set of steps in CoDA, that was the main thing I got, was I started to stand up for myself. I started to say no. I started to, you know, instead of putting myself forward for things, I would just say, can I get back to you on that? And I'll let you know. You know, that was like a whole new concept. And we started to go through the steps, and I really, you know, my control was at the point when I came to this program where I would leave my partner to-do list in the morning. I would say, don't do, you know, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And I really, you know, I had control around what I would eat every day, control around my exercise. I just didn't know how to go into life and be normal. You know, it was like control was my safety structure. And, you know, I really understand today that that was my lack of faith, you know. And even though I'd done lots of step 3s in another fellowship, I hadn't really trusted God at all. And I hadn't really handed anything over to my higher power. And when I first came to CoDA, it was like another level of surrender, another level of, right, I've got to start letting go and adopting the principles of this program. And for me, it was the opposite to the other program, because it wasn't about doing things for other people. It was about putting me first. And that has been the most phenomenal thing in my life. To change things and put myself at the front of the queue has been the most beautiful and the most difficult thing to do. You know, in the beginning, when I'd say no to people, I'd have all of this like guilt and shame, and this afterburn of putting myself first was wrong because my family of origin had said, you know, you don't talk about yourself, you always offer to do things for other people, you know. So all of these, you know, I was the manual I was given for life by my parents and the manual for relationships was totally wrong, you know, and I've had to relearn how to have relationships. And, you know, to put myself first was just this, like, can I really do that? And by doing that, I've really started to understand that, you know, without me, I can't support any other people. Without me being well, without me being, you know, connected with my higher power. And we started the meeting with the step 3 prayer in CoDA. And I love that prayer. I do that prayer every morning, because that prayer for me, even in my darkest moments in CoDA, because I think I always imagined CoDA recovery would just be like this upward trajectory of like getting weller, you know, and just being totally uncodependent. And what I realize is it's so not like that, you know. Recovery from codependency is 2 steps back and 1 step forward, and lots of recycling. And I know when I'm pushed in a corner and I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired, fearful, ill, stressed out, not enough sleep, I go back to my codependent behavior. It's like a default setting. It's like a groove in a record: control, caretake, avoid my inner world. You know, so my CoDA recovery, even though things have changed a lot, I've found this voice. I've now got such a big voice, and I'm so good at speaking my truth. I have to now, the most loving thing some of the time is for me to say, Amanda, it's time for you to keep your mouth shut now, you know. And I understand that is also a big part of CoDA recovery, you know. Because of my childhood, I had always been quite vocal, and I now know that you know, that stuff around telling people how to live and giving unsolicited advice. I've done so much of that in my life, and I now understand that actually it's just so much better just to sit back and allow people to just be who they are. I think my partner, my relationship wouldn't have survived if I hadn't have come to CoDA. You know, I had met this beautiful woman, and I wanted the relationship to work, and I had so many sabotaging behaviors that if I hadn't come and done the work in this fellowship, there is no way I would still be with my partner today. And you know, my relationship with my mum, I've had a many years distance from my mum because it's been really difficult to be around her. And you know, we talk about inner child in CoDA, and you know, that rage. I've had 10 years of rage really in Codependents Anonymous, and I think my rage is equivalent to the damage that was done to me. In a way, you know, I have to be honest that it's taken me many years. It's only been in the last year or so where I feel like I'm just at that point where I'm really letting go of what happened to me. But what I know is I had a lot of repressed memories of what had happened to me, and through the time I've been in CoDA, those memories have come up, and I've had to sort of put that stuff to rest. And you know, and I've did a really big thing a couple of years ago. I sat down with my mum and I just said, you know, what happened to me as a little girl was not okay, you know. And she looked at me and I said, I'm not blaming you, but I'm saying putting a child in a bedroom and not loving them and not giving them care and attention and emotional support, and you know, was not okay. And my mum, she wasn't drunk at that, and she sort of heard it, and she just said, Amanda, you know, that was how my mum, that was how I was treated as a child. And I said, I know, I understand that. I said, but I just need to say for little Amanda, it wasn't okay. And that was a really pivotal conversation. It had taken me sort of 8 years of work in CoDA to do that, to get to that point where my inner child, my little girl, needed to express what had happened to me, and a lot of courage. Actually, my mum's quite a vicious alcoholic and can be very unpredictable, but I did it on a good day where I felt it was okay to do that. And that was me really trying to, and I didn't do it in a blaming way, you know, and I don't blame my parents for what happened, but I had to, somewhere through this process, I believe we have to get in contact. You know, I couldn't be angry as a little girl, so that rage was in there. outlet was blocked, and it was in there and it was stopping me from recovering. And I've had a lot of years in CoDA of ranting about my mum, you know, and being triggered around my family, you know, and I don't think that'll ever end, and that's all right. But I've needed to do that, you know, I've needed, and this fellowship has held me, and this fellowship, you guys, the people in this program have understood me. You know, I felt like I'm in a place where I can share that stuff and it's okay, and I don't feel like I'm an alien with 3 heads, you know, that people think you're weird and there's something wrong with you. And you know, and even my mum today, you know, I love my mum, but there are aspects of my mum that I really don't like. You know, she is who she is, but she's still an active alcoholic, and I'm grateful for the relationship I have, and a lot of that has come from CoDA, where I've learned to have boundaries. I've learned not to take the phone. She phoned actually about half an hour ago, and I know it's like the cutoff point. She starts drinking at 5, so I know the phone went at 7:20, and I was like, I'm not answering that call, you know, because I know I'll get angry, she'll get abusive. It's like, so I just don't answer that call. And I was supposed to be going down for Christmas, and it's the first Christmas I would have spent with her for about 10 years. I've had 10 years break from my mum at Christmas, because CoDA gave me the permission to do that. You know, I was so locked in. My mum was such a powerful, dominant force in my life that I used to go there when I hated it. You know, she'd get drunk and it would be horrible, and you know, and CoDA gave me permission to say, it's all right, I can do what I want, and my family of choice are in the fellowship. You know, this is where I connect. This is the people that love me. These are the people I go to when I'm struggling, not my family, you know. And I've also, you know, the process, when I did my first step 4 in CoDA, it just blew me away, the table that we have in our step working guide, the second table, not the table that goes back and looks at all the characteristics, but the second table that shows us where the codependent behavior comes from, the feelings that sit under the specific codependent behaviors. And when I did that, every column, every one in the second column came to fear of abandonment. And I really understood that all of my issues came from this abandonment issue, and that actually, that wound, that abandonment wound, is the stuff that has leaked over all of my life, you know. And I was clearly shown in that first round of steps in CoDA how every relationship, there wasn't one relationship in my life that wasn't set up on a codependent setting. And what I had to do was, my mum would say, you have to separate the wheat from the chaff, and I had to sort of go through my friends and find the ones that were willing to come on this journey with me, you know, because I've changed massively in the time that I've been in this fellowship, because I've stayed in it and I've done the work. And what I realized was I had a lot of people that were like drains on me. I'm like a radiator and they were like drains, and I'd needed those drains to feel needed. But as I got weller in CoDA, I let go of these people that needed me and started to understand, like it says in our promises, of wanting equality, wanting relationships where people would say to me, Amanda, how are you? How are you? And that was a whole new concept. I'd spent hours on the phone with people asking how they are, because I couldn't let anyone see who I was. You know, I had this toxic shame about who I was, and I didn't know how to let people support me. I didn't know how to ask for help, you know. And so this was a really big thing, to come to CoDA and start to get vulnerable about this stuff, and start to understand that abandonment was at the core of my codependency, and all my relationships were set up on the premise of, please don't leave me. You know, I couldn't be honest in relationships because I thought if I was honest, people would leave me, especially with my mum, especially with my partner, especially with my closest friends. And then because of that, because I couldn't get honest, I allowed to have sort of abusive people in my life, people that didn't treat me well, that didn't respect me. I had a best friend that every time we'd go into a coffee shop, she would wait for me to go and buy the coffees. you know, and because I've always been someone that's lavish gifts, expensive gifts, and buy things for people, another one that's in our characteristics, she would wait for me to go and buy the coffees or buy the dinner or buy, you know, and I allowed that to happen to me because of being this chronic codependent that always wanted to look after everybody. And so it started to change. My friendships changed. I started to say no to people. I started to be less busy. I started to really be in CoDA meetings, really start to open my ears and listen. And I started to put on the CoDA glasses in my life. And I started to realize for the first time ever that, you know, all my friends, it was like I could see codependency in everybody, not just in myself. So it was like a whole new opening of what CoDA is, and this massive spectrum. You know, I realized in my step group there was 3 of us, but we all exhibited codependency in different ways, you know. And so I really understood that there were all of these ways of being codependent. And when I first saw the characteristics in step 4, you have the list, the 4 arenas: the control, the low self-esteem, the compliance, and I can't remember what the other one is now. I've got a bit of a menopausal brain. But when I read those characteristics, I was like, I've got all of them. You know, I just couldn't believe the identification of having so many. You know, it was like, yes, 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 everything. And there wasn't one that I didn't have. And I, you know, and I really understood that this was going to be a total unpicking of my personality and changing. And that work's been really difficult, guys. You know, I just think I came in and you know, and I found my voice, and I started to be courageous and have courageous conversations with people in my life to create intimacy. I didn't know how to be intimate. I didn't know. I used to sit on my partner and I would have these serious chairs in the bedroom, and we would sit on these chairs, and I would be quiet, she would talk, I would have to be quiet, and I'd listen to her, and then she would let me talk, and then I, you know, and it was like we had to learn. She came from a crazy alcoholic family system as well, and we had to learn how to be loving and kind to each other. And the other thing that I really had when I first came in was this really fierce inner critic, this voice in my head that had just literally completely annihilated me through my life. And it was just this voice that would constantly tell me, you're not good enough, you're not lovable, don't go for that job, you won't get that job. If I made a mistake, it would swear at me, it would say, you are hopeless, how could you do that? You know, and it was constantly berating me. And what it did was it held me back from my potential, you know, and it never supported me. It was like having a devil on my shoulder that was just constantly having this internal dialogue of how bad I was and how I couldn't do this and how I wasn't capable. And that was the other thing that brought me here, the self-loathing, the level of self-hatred, and this fierce inner critic. And I started to do this work, and I started to understand where the critic came from that trauma as a little girl. You know, my parents weren't verbally that abusive to me, but the neglect gave me this voice in my head. And I started to read books. I started to go on the journey of trying to find out what happens and what emotional neglect does to a child. And I didn't think, you know, because I hadn't been sexually abused, and because I hadn't been battered, and because I was brought up in a middle-class home with a nanny and privately educated and nice little curls in my hair and well dressed, that I wasn't damaged. And it was all a facade, because I now understand now there was no love, there was no nurture, and that stuff was the stuff that created you know, my story really, and my inability to feel love. And you know, so I came with this fierce inner critic that just used to annihilate me on all levels, you know, and I really thought I'd never get rid of that voice. And, you know, after doing, I think I'm in my 3rd round of steps now, you know, most probably about 4 or 5 years ago, the critic went. It's never come back. I don't have that voice anymore. I have this loving, parental, kind, compassionate, loving, like the voice of my higher power, really, just this voice that just says to me, it's all right, you're going to be all right. And you know, the things that I've struggled with is trying to be a more loving person. You know, I think for me, letting the love in has been really tough. You know, I feel like I came here with walls around my heart, you know, just these thick walls around the heart, and I couldn't connect with other people. And I've wanted to be loved, and I've wanted to feel love, and I've wanted to give love, and I've wanted to feel lovable. But all of that stuff was incredibly difficult for me, because of the barriers that I'd put up. And letting the love in has been really, really tough. And I really understand that, you know, as I've got more awareness around my codependency, you know, the other thing I have, not only the inner critic, I've got this outer critic that is constantly judging, shaming, pushing people away. And I've had, you know, I've had a really difficult time with my partner to stop this criticalness. So the inner critic went, but what happened was it was like the power moved from the inner critic to the outer critic. And you know, and my partner has stayed with me despite my flicking out, you know, this constant, as soon as I hit pain, I flick out and I flick it onto her. And that's not, you know, it's not, to get well in Codependents Anonymous, I've had to talk about some really ugly aspects of my personality. And this last round of steps, I've had to really face the fact that I am quite a dominator, I'm a railroader, I'm a bit of a bully, you know, I want things my way, you know, and I really, it was really painful. We did our step 4 in Regent's Park in London in the summer, last summer, and I sat there and I really had a moment of like, oh my God, you know, I'm nearly 20 years in recovery, and I see that I have these aspects of my personality that are so unattractive, you know. But I'm so pleased that I came to CoDA to really see that vision of myself. And I see that as recovery. And I'm not going to allow my sort of shame to say, oh, that's because you're bad or whatever. You know, I understand that that's just another layer of the onion coming off, another layer of my awareness of seeing who I am, because I want to recover and not live out that damage. And, you know, my step group loved me, you know, my step group loved me through that step 4. And it was beautiful, you know. And again, it's just another layer. And the whole thing is that, you know, I've stayed in this work. Despite myself, you know, there's been days where I just feel like I'm back at the beginning again. And actually I'm not, you know. I think I've been in CoDA maybe 11 coming up for 12 years now. And, you know, and the stuff that I've gone through in here, and the change in when I look at myself when I first came to CoDA, of how I was, and all the dissent, you know, it talks about in our literature, the bondage, you know, that bondage. I was so trapped by my codependency. Every relationship, I was trapped in dishonesty because I was terrified of everyone leaving, you know. And that stuff has gone. You know, I can work out what is mine now and what is theirs. I don't have that difficulty. I can set boundaries. I can let my higher power in. You know, I know without the daily contact, without the spiritual aspect of this program, the daily connection for me, if I'm not doing my spiritual practice every morning, which is my step 3 prayers and meditation, if I'm not letting God in, I go back. I default, you know, to all of my codependent behaviors. And so I have to really work on allowing my higher power and trusting my higher power. And I've just done, we're in this steps again, and we're on step 3, and I've just done a step 3 with my step group. And you know, my levels, it's just like another level of surrendering my fear, and being in faith, and living in faith, and living in the support of my higher power. And I met someone a few years ago, and she always talked about, you know, in those dark moments, to just imagine that you are held in the arms of your higher power. And I do that a lot, you know. I just imagine that my God has got me, you know, and I'm going to be okay. And I have so many so many experiences of the more I hand over my control and the more I get out the way, miracles happen in my life, you know. And one of the miracles that I feel like in my recovery is when I stopped looking after other people, I created all of this space in my head for me, for my desires, for my dreams, for where I wanted to go, for what I wanted to do in my life. And, you know, I'd worked in addictions for like 15 years and my job went, and I feel like God got rid of the job. God was like, it's time to move on now. And I thought, well, what do I want to do? And I went and did this yoga teacher training. And we'd also spent a lot of our summer, a lot of our winters in Goa in India. And I love India. And I said to my partner, we're gonna move to India. We're gonna live in Goa for the winters, and we're gonna buy a canal boat. And I was a hippie in the 90s, and I used to have big trucks. And I said, don't worry, the boat's just like a big truck. We'll be fine. And my partner's a woman, and we did it. You know, we went and bought this boat. We bought this canal boat, and we got on the boat. And I was like, it's a boat. It's not a truck. And I couldn't drive it. And you know, and then we created this lovely life. We live on this beautiful beach normally when COVID's not here. And I sit in this yoga shala, right? And I look out on the Arabian Sea and I just cry. I think, oh my God, how did I get here? And I got here because I started to put myself first. And I started to have dreams about where I wanted to be and to fulfill my potential and to realize that I didn't want to chase money anymore. I wanted to give myself a wonderful life. I wanted to focus on self-care and self-love. And, you know, and I teach yoga and I love teaching yoga. And I love just taking what we do in CoDA into my yoga practice. So I talk about, and I use all our little expressions, you know, about being precious, unique beings we are. And I just think, wow, I wouldn't have done that. You know, I know that if I hadn't have come here to CoDA and made room for me in my life and made room for my dreams, I wouldn't have created this beautiful lifestyle. And I live on this canal boat in the summer, and we're like little hippies on this boat, and we wash with wet wipes when we've run out of water. But that's all right. And we pee in a bucket. But I love that. You know, we've got this life now where we're not chasing money. We just live with what we have. We do very little work. I do nothing in Goa. I just sit on a beach and I eat lovely food and I play beach tennis and I do yoga and I just do all the things that I love doing, you know. And CoDA gave me that. CoDA gave me that permission to give up the job, free myself, you know. And all right, I had a bit of work. I got made redundant, but I think my higher power pushed me. And you know, CoDA recovery has just been amazing. I can look at myself in this box, you know, I can see my reflection in this box and I think I look lovely, you know, and I couldn't do that. And I've changed. When I look at myself, I look lovely because I feel lovely inside, you know. I didn't ever feel lovely. I hated looking at myself. And that sounds really weird and namby-pamby, but it's not. It's the spiritual aspect of learning to love ourselves. And I spend so much time now loving myself. Today I had a day on my own. I took myself for a walk in the rain up to a park. I came back and did some yoga on my own, you know, and I love my own company. I don't have that need for people anymore. You know, with me and my higher power, that's it. I'm very content, you know, and I know that I have to stay in it. I don't, even in Goa, my neighbour's in early CoDA recovery, and we have a little meeting, just me and her twice a week in Goa, and we sit there and we share the literature, and we invite, when we have friends come and people come and stay in the resort where I work, we invite them to CoDA. And, you know, so I take my program with me, and I love our step 10, you know. I've been doing with my step group, we have a WhatsApp inventory, and we do our gratitude and inventory every day. And I've been doing that for about a year now, and it's the most amazing thing. That inventory group has transformed my CoDA recovery, because I've really had to be accountable every day on my codependent behavior. And I did a step 8 and 9 with my partner for all the critical stuff that I've done to her over the years. And I set up a fine system. So if I was critical to her and made her feel bad, I'd have to give her a tenner every time. And that worked for me. I mean, it's quite an abstract, I'm such a tight ass, that if I was exhibiting any mean behavior to her or being critical, I'd pay her £10. And she did really well. I did this about a year ago. In the beginning, I kept having to pay £10. And in the end, I was like, right, I'm not doing this anymore. And I've stopped, you know, I've stopped in the last 6 months. I've just stopped being mean to her, even when I'm tired, even when I get into those, you know, when I'm sort of, you know, under-resourced and I feel ill, or it's generally when I feel ill, tired, fearful, triggered by my family, I'd flick out at my wife. And I've stopped doing that, you know, and that is a gift of CoDA, you know, because she feels better, because I'm more loving towards her. You know, so I've gone to any lengths really, you know, like with money, and I'll do anything to try and rein my behavior in. But the WhatsApp group, doing that daily inventory, and also looking, you know, keeping that focus on loving myself. Have I eaten well today? You know, I try and do some exercise every day. I connect with my higher power. I try to be loving in my communication and keep my comms good, keep my communication clean. You know, I didn't know how to communicate in a direct fashion when I came to CoDA, and now I can communicate in a way where I'm not worried about hurting people's feelings anymore. You know, my needs and my wants are, I know how to express it in a kind way. I still have sometimes that, you know, where I can be a bit explosive. You know, I know when I first came here, when I would try to express my needs, they'd come out really loud, and I've got a little bit better at the delivery, you know, but it's a gentle process. And you know, I've learned to love myself. I think there's that thing of being imperfectly perfect. You know, I love myself sort of warts and all, good, bad and ugly. And I don't, even when I make a mistake now, you know, that was a really big thing for me when I was before the CoDA program. If I made a mistake, I would rehash it and rewind it in my head for about a week. You know, I'd like shame spirals around it. And I just don't do that anymore. If I make a mistake, I put my hand on my heart and I say, it's all right. It's all right. You're okay. You know, and it's funny because through this chair, I'm like not breathing at all. I'm like panting. And I just think even my breath, you know, I didn't feel like I had a right to breathe, to take big, deep, nourishing breaths. You know, I'd lived in survival breath, in that fight or flight breath before I came to CoDA, and I don't have that anymore. Most, apart from I get overexcited and share, but you know, most of the time I feel like I have a right to be on this planet. I have a right to take in nourishing air, to breathe deeply, to love myself and be kind to myself, you know. And it's never ending. And I feel like, you know, I've been 11, 12 years in this process, and I have so much. When people read the promises, I'm like, yes, I feel it. I've got this love. I have equal relationships. I don't feel lonely. I feel content with my own company, you know, and I've managed to pass on this thing. I've sponsored quite a few women and gone through the steps with them to enable them to make those changes too. And that's such a privilege to go through these steps and pass on what I've learned. And some days, you know, just before this chair, I had a little low self-esteem moment. I thought, what do I know? I don't know anything about CoDA, you know. But actually, when I sponsor someone, I really just, it's like, wow, I have all this information and all this guidance to give from what I've got from this fellowship. You know, it's given me a whole new tool set of life and a whole new way of living. And I feel like I finally got given the manual for life and the manual to how to have loving, healthy relationships. And I don't get it right every day, but most days I do. Most days I know I can separate what's mine and what's theirs, and I can really, you know, keep working and keep being in this process. And you know, that spiritual connection for me, if I haven't got that daily connection, then I know I can drift off really easily. And you know, and I'm proud to be a member of this fellowship. It's incredibly loving, nurturing, from the fellowship that I came from, which felt a little bit punishing at times and not so much loving. This program has the loving, it's made me more compassionate towards me. Maybe that's the change, but I just feel CoDA's outlook on the steps and the way the steps, the work that we do, the way our working guide is entwined with the traditions and links our, you know, step one with tradition one. I love that, you know. Our working guide is just beautiful, and you know, I wouldn't have my life any other way. I'm so glad that I came into this fellowship, and I'm so glad I stayed and did the work. And I think, you know, the work is the crux of it, putting pen to paper, finding a step group if you can't find a sponsor. Step groups for me have been phenomenal. I have a sponsor, but I would never go back and work the steps with a sponsor, because I love the step group.